Guys, welcome to Biochemistry Part 1. We are looking at the chemicals of life, or biochemistry. So let's break down this word. Big words in biology are not scary because they're just made of lots of smaller words. So bio, we know at this point, means that it is the study of living things or the study of life. So biochemistry, we know that we are studying something living. Chemistry is the study of chemicals. So we are looking at the chemicals of life. And so what does this mean? What are the chemicals of life? Chemicals, we get a picture in our head. We think that they're just liquids. But chemicals, when we're in science, are molecules. And so we're looking at the molecules of life. We are studying the molecules that make up living things. So some of the molecules are like oxygen. We breathe this in. And so this isn't a liquid, but it is a chemical. This right here is something that we call fat. It is a lipid, and here is the lipid molecule or the lipid chemical. And so there is lots of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens. This is a molecule. It is a molecule of life. And so these are what we're studying, the molecules of living things. And that's what biochemistry is just simply the molecules of living things. And so in this biochemistry unit, we are studying things called macromolecules. And if we look at the word macro, if I were to underline this right here, if we are looking at macromolecules, macro means large. And so we're looking at the large molecules of living things. So the three macromolecules of life, let's make this bold, macromolecules of life. The three macromolecules of life that we're studying are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Carbohydrates are things that I'm sure you've heard of. They're found in breads and all sorts of other foods, but they're found in lots of things that you haven't heard about. In fact, they're found in most of our foods. Even if it isn't a bagel or cereal, there's still carbs in meat and in vegetables, but in some foods there's more carbs. And the same is true with fats. Fats are also known as lipids. And so lipids, once again, there are some foods that are fatty foods. If we're thinking about oils or nuts have lots of oils or lipids, but all foods have some lipids. But some just have more. And then finally, proteins. Proteins are our final macromolecule that we're talking about. So why does it sound like these macromolecules of life, these things that we're made of, why are they things that we eat? Well, that's because we need to eat the things that make us up, that make us who we are. We need to give ourselves the pieces to build us. And so we eat the things that we are made of. And so let's look at the things that we get in our food. Why are we eating food? Well, we get two things from our food. We get nutrients and energy. And these are two very different things, but two very important things. If you remember from the characteristics of life, a characteristic of life was that you need materials and energy. And so materials, that's our nutrients. Those are the elements or the matter in which we're made of. And energy is the ability to do work. It's the ability to think, to move. You can't touch energy, but it is there. So we can touch matter. So our arm is made up of proteins and lipids and carbohydrates, and we can touch it. So we can touch the elements. That's matter, things that we can touch. However, we also get energy from our food. And the energy, the ability to do work or to think, we actually find that in between the elements. We find that in a place called the bonds, but we're not going to talk about that yet. Just think of the energy as being stored in between. Let's say if we have a carbon and it's sitting next to a carbon, that's where the energy is stored. But we need both of these things in our food. We need nutrients and energy. We need to be made of something, and we need to be able to move and think. And so let's today talk about just the nutrients. We're not going to talk about energy today. Let's just talk about the nutrients. So the most abundant nutrients in our food, we can use the mnemonic device New Hampshire cups. And so what does New Hampshire COPS stand for? N for nitrogen, H for hydrogen, C for carbon, O for oxygen, P for phosphorus, S for sulfur. New Hampshire COPS. And so these are the most abundant elements that you find in a living thing. And actually, the single most abundant element that we find in a living thing, or the single most abundant nutrient that we find in a living things, is carbon. Carbon. Do you see all of this carbon? This is a fat molecule or a lipid, and there's lots of carbon. Do you see all of these C's? Carbon, 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 carbon. All of this carbon. Because of all this carbon, this makes it an organic molecule. So when we're shopping in the grocery store, the word organic means that it was made free of pesticides and the animals were treated right and so forth. But that is a different meaning than the way that we use organic in science class. The word organic in science class means that it contains lots of carbon. And so this right here is a molecule that contains lots of carbon, and it is part of a living thing. And so therefore, it is organic. And that's why we say that life is carbon-based or organic life, because there's lots and lots of carbon. So there are three macromolecules that we talked about: lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. And we find these lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins in different states. They can exist as a single unit or as a large chain. So the word that we use, there's lots of vocab in this unit. The word that we use to describe a single unit of a carbohydrate or a single unit of a protein or a single unit of a lipid is we say monomer. Mono, the prefix mono, means single. And the word mer, or the suffix mer, means molecule. So single molecule. And when you're talking about a large chain, we're talking about a polymer. So the prefix poly means many, so many molecules, or the entire chain. So let's use this in a couple of examples. A little bit of practice. If we have a whole bunch of kittens all lined up, what would be the monomer? A monomer in this scenario would be a single kitten, whereas the polymer would be the whole line of kittens. And they are adorable. Oh my gosh, that makes me want to get a kitten. One last example, if we look at a picket fence, we would say that a monomer in this example would be a single picket, one single picket. And the polymer would be the entire fence, would be all of the pickets put together. And so let's look at an example in biochemistry. Let's look at an example of a carbohydrate. So specific to a carbohydrate. Let me not make that. Let me just underline that. The monomer is glucose. Glucose is a sugar. So let's put that also a sugar. And this is our example of one sugar or one glucose molecule. Glucose is a word that we're going to hear a lot of coming up. So glucose is our sugar. And if we take, do you see how we have lots of sugars here or lots of glucose? We have lots of glucose all linked up. They're all bonded together. So here we have lots of glucose bonded together to make a polymer. The example of the polymer that we're using is starch. So starch is a carbohydrate. It is a polymer of a carbohydrate. And glucose is a monomer of a carbohydrate. So glucose is a carbohydrate and it is a monomer. It is a monomer of a carbohydrate. Okay, that's it for today. Be ready for lots of vocab and have a great day.